My dad said his new wife needed him more than his son, so I stopped calling. When my dad said his new wife needed him more than I did, I never thought it would be the last time I'd hear his voice. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Ethan, and I was 16 when my life changed forever. It started with the wedding invitation, a sleek, expensive card that arrived in the mail with a note from my dad, Mark, telling me he was getting married to a woman named Patricia. I remember staring at the card, the elegant gold lettering mocking me, as I realized my father was choosing someone else over me. Patricia was beautiful, sophisticated, and everything my mother hadn't been. She wore designer clothes, had a perfect manicure, and spoke with a confidence that made my teenage self shrink. At the wedding, I watched as my dad, the man who had taught me to fish and fix my bike, pledge his life to a woman I barely knew. When he said, "I promise to put Patricia's needs above all others," I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The first few months weren't so bad. Patricia seemed nice enough, if a bit distant. But then the small things began to add up. My dad started canceling our weekend fishing trips because Patricia didn't like being alone. He stopped coming to my basketball games because they conflicted with Patricia's book club meetings. Each time, he'd promised to make it up to me, but the promises grew thinner, like paper in the rain. One evening, I came home from school to find my dad and Patricia arguing in the kitchen. I heard Patricia say, "You're always running off to do something for Ethan. When do I get your attention?" My dad's voice, usually so steady, wavered as he replied, "He's my son, Patricia. I can't just." "You can," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "You promised me you'd put me first. That's what marriage is about, Mark." I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding as my dad's footsteps approached. When he opened the door, his face was pale. "Ethan, I'm sorry. Patricia and I had a disagreement." "How was school?" I wanted to scream, to tell him what I'd heard, but something in his eyes stopped me. It was the same look he'd had when my mother died years ago, resigned, broken. So I nodded and said, "Fine," before heading to my room. That night, I lay awake, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter from downstairs. I wondered if this was what it felt like to be replaced, to become an afterthought in your own father's life. The next morning, I found a note on my pillow. "Sorry about last night. Let's have a father-son day this weekend. Love, Dad." But when Saturday came, my dad was nowhere to be found. Patricia told me he'd gone to the city with her to help choose new furniture for the house. "Your father wants our home to be perfect, Ethan," she said, smiling as if she hadn't just shattered my hope. I spent the day in my room, the note from my dad burning a hole in my pocket. By Sunday evening, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't wait for him anymore. If he wanted to be part of my life, he knew where to find me. The weeks turned into months, and the pattern continued. Promises made, promises broken. My dad would show up occasionally, his guilt evident in the gifts he brought, but each visit grew shorter, each excuse more flimsy. Patricia became the center of our home, her needs dictating the rhythm of our lives. By my 17th birthday, I'd stopped expecting anything from my father. The card he gave me that year was the same one he'd given me the year before, a generic store-bought card with his signature scrawled at the bottom. No personal message, no mention of the milestone I was reaching. That night, as I blew out my candles, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would grow up, go to college, and build a life where I was never an afterthought again. And if my dad wanted to be part of that life, he would have to prove he deserved it. Little did I know, the silence that was growing between us would become the loudest thing in our relationship, a silence that would change everything. By the time I turned 18, the distance between my dad and me had become a chasm I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. High school graduation loomed, a milestone that should have been celebrated with pride and excitement. But for me, it was just another event my dad would likely miss. Patricia had taken over the planning of my graduation party, choosing a venue and menu that reflected her taste rather than mine. "It's important to make a good impression, Ethan," she'd said, flipping through a catalog of party decorations. "Your father wants everyone to see that we're a proper family." I nodded, but inside I seethed. This wasn't my celebration. It was a performance for Patricia's friends. The only reason I agreed to it was the hope that my dad would finally show up, that he'd see what he was missing and realize the mistake he'd made. The weeks leading up to graduation were a blur of final exams, college applications, and the growing tension at home. My dad seemed more distant than ever, often working late or disappearing for business dinners that Patricia arranged. I knew the truth, of course. He was with her, prioritizing her needs over mine. One afternoon, I came home to find my dad packing a suitcase. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice tight. "A business trip," he replied, not looking at me. "Patricia and I are going to the coast for the weekend." I felt a surge of anger. "So you can miss my graduation?" "Dad, this is important to me." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't read. "Ethan, I'm sorry. Patricia's father is retiring, and it's a big deal. We can't miss it." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "So, well, my graduation isn't a big deal? For years of hard work, and it's not important enough for you to be there?" "It's not that," he said, his voice strained. "It's just timing. Timing." I repeated, the word tasting like bile in my mouth. "Everything is about timing with you, isn't it? When Patricia needs you, you're there. When I need you, it's never the right time." "Ethan, don't." "Don't what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't point out the obvious?" "Dad, I'm not a child anymore. I see what's happening. I see how she controls you, how she's turned you against me." My dad's face hardened. "That's not fair, Ethan. Patricia is my wife. I made a commitment to her. And to me, I demanded. What about your commitment to me? You promised we'd go fishing this summer. You promised you'd help me fix up my car. You promised you'd be at my graduation. When are you going to keep a promise to me?" He looked away, his jaw clenched. "I'm trying, son. It's not easy. Trying." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Trying will be showing up. Trying would be remembering the things that matter to me. But you don't, do you? Because Patricia doesn't want you to." I turned and walked away, the sound of my dad calling my name fading into the background. In my room, I slammed the door and stared at the walls, the anger and hurt swirling inside me like a storm. I knew then that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for a father who was never really there. The night before graduation, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the party Patricia had planned. I wouldn't pretend that this was a celebration I wanted to be part of. Instead, I would go to my graduation, accept my diploma, and then leave. I would start my life on my own terms, without the constant disappointment of a father who chose everyone else over me. When graduation day came, I put on my cap and gown, the weight of the fabric a metaphor for the burden I carried. As I walked across the stage, I scanned the audience, half hoping to see my dad's face, half dreading it. But he wasn't there. Patricia wasn't there either. The only family member in the crowd was my grandmother, who beamed with pride as I shook the principal's hand. After the ceremony, I found my grandmother waiting for me. "Your father called," she said, her voice gentle. "He said he was sorry he couldn't make it. He had a family emergency." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "It's okay, Grandma." "Really?" She studied me for a moment, then pulled me into a hug. "Ethan, your father loves you. He's just lost right now." I wanted to believe her, but the words rang hollow. If he loved me, why wasn't he here? Why had he chosen a weekend getaway over my graduation? That evening, I packed a small bag and left a note on my bed. "Going to college early. See you when I'm ready." I didn't look back as I walked out the door, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence of the house I once called home. The breaking point had come, and I was walking away. The first year of college was a blur of new faces, late-night study sessions, and the constant ache of missing my old life. I threw myself into my studies, using the distraction as a shield against the pain of my father's absence. My dorm room became my sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts and my growing resentment. At first, I waited for my dad to call. I checked my phone constantly, half hoping to see his name on the screen. But the calls never came. Instead, there were occasional text messages from Patricia asking how I was doing and reminding me that my dad missed me. I deleted them without replying, each one a painful reminder of the family I'd lost. My grandmother became my lifeline, the only person who seemed to understand what I was going through. She called regularly, her voice warm and reassuring, and sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and notes of encouragement. Through her, I learned that my dad was trying in his own way. He'd asked about me, she said, and seemed genuinely concerned about how I was adjusting to college. But her words didn't ease the hurt. I knew my dad wasn't trying hard enough. If he really cared, he would have made the effort to reach out, to show me that I mattered. Instead, he was living a new life, one where I was an afterthought. As the months passed, the silence between us grew louder. I stopped checking my phone for his calls. I stopped thinking about him altogether, focusing instead on building a new life for myself. I made friends, joined clubs, and even started dating a girl named Maya who had a similar quiet strength to her. Maya knew about my father, of course. I told her the whole story, the broken promises, and the final breaking point. She listened without judgment, her hand in mine as I spoke. "Ethan, you can't let his choices define you," she said one evening as we walked across campus. "You're better than that." I nodded, but the words didn't fully sink in. How could I not let his choices define me when they had shaped my entire childhood? The summer after my freshman year, I went home for a visit. It was awkward and tense, a dance of polite smiles and forced conversations. Patricia was overly friendly, asking about my classes and my friends, while my dad watched from the sidelines, his guilt evident in his eyes. We talked about everything and nothing, the elephant in the room growing larger with each passing minute. Before I left, my dad pulled me aside. "Ethan, I'm sorry about graduation," he said, his voice low. "Things have been difficult." I shrugged, tried to appear unaffected. "It's in the past, Dad. I'm moving on." He nodded, but I could see the pain in his eyes. "I want to make it up to you. Maybe we could go fishing this summer, just the two of us." I wanted to say yes, to believe that this time would be different. But the doubt was too strong, the hurt too deep. "I'm busy with an internship," I lied. "Maybe another time." He looked disappointed, but he didn't push. "Okay, son, take care of yourself." As I drove away from the house, I felt a pang of regret. Maybe I should have given him another chance, but the fear of being disappointed again was too great. I couldn't risk it. The silence continued, each month bringing a new milestone I shared with Maya and my friends, but not with my dad. I got good grades, joined the debate team, and even won a small scholarship. Through it all, I waited for him to notice, to care, but the calls never came. By the time I turned 20, I had accepted the silence as my new reality. It was easier this way, I told myself. No broken promises, no disappointment, no pain. I focused on my future, on the career I was building, and on the relationships that mattered. But deep down, I knew the silence was a wound that hadn't healed. It was a constant reminder of what I'd lost, of the father I once had and the family I no longer belonged to. And as the years went by, I began to wonder if the silence would ever end, or if it would become my legacy. By the time I turned 25, I had built a life I was proud of. I graduated from college with honors, landed a good job in marketing, and was living in a small apartment with Maya. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. The silence with my dad had become a comfortable routine, a part of my life I rarely thought about. Then the call came. It was my grandmother, her voice shaky and urgent. "Ethan, your dad is in the hospital. It's serious." I froze, the world around me fading into the background. "What happened?" I asked, my heart pounding. "He had a heart attack," she said, her voice breaking. "Patricia called me. She said he's not doing well." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, the words echoing in my mind. Heart attack, not doing well. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. My dad, the man who had chosen everyone else over me, was sick, and I hadn't spoken to him in years. Maya came home from work to find me sitting on the couch, staring into space. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "My dad's in the hospital," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He had a heart attack." She sat down next to me, taking my hand. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry." I nodded, but the tears were already falling. "I haven't talked to him in years, Maya. What if it's too late?" She pulled me into a hug, her arms strong and comforting. "It's not too late, Ethan. Go to him, please." The next morning, I packed a bag and drove to the hospital. The city was familiar yet strange. The streets I'd grown up on now seeming foreign. As I walked into the hospital, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. What would I say? How would he react to seeing me after all this time? I found my dad's room, the number 314 glowing softly on the door. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small and sterile, the beeping of machines filling the air. My dad lay in the bed, pale and thin, a tube in his nose. Patricia sat in a chair by the window, her face etched with worry. When she saw me, she stood up, her expression a mix of relief and guilt. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "You came." I nodded, my eyes fixed on my dad. "How is he?" "He's stable," she replied, her gaze shifting to the machines. "The doctors say he's lucky to be alive." I approached the bed, my heart pounding. My dad's eyes were closed, his face relaxed in sleep. I reached out, my fingers hovering above his hand, then pulled back. What if he woke up and saw me? What if he was angry? What if he didn't want to see me? Patricia must have sensed my hesitation. "He's been asking for you," she said, her voice soft. "He misses you, Ethan." I looked at her, surprised. "He does." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "He talks about you all the time. About the fishing trips you used to take, about your graduation. He's sorry, Ethan. Truly sorry." I turned back to my dad, my throat tight. The man in the bed was a stranger to me, yet I could see traces of the father I once knew. The same eyes, the same hands. The silence between us suddenly felt heavier, more painful than ever. As if on cue, my dad's eyes fluttered open. He looked around, his gaze landing on me. For a moment, he just stared, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice weak. I stepped closer, my hand reaching out to take his. "Dad," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm here." He squeezed my hand, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, son. So sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to forgive him, to let go of the pain and anger, but the hurt was too deep, too real. How could I forgive someone who had chosen everyone else over me for so long? Patricia left the room, giving us privacy. I sat by the bed, holding my dad's hand, and listened as he spoke. He told me about the guilt he felt, about the ways he had failed me, about the regret that had haunted him for years. He spoke of Patricia, of how she had become controlling, of how he had let her come between us. "I should have been stronger," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have put you first." I nodded, the tears streaming down my face. "You should have." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Can you forgive me, Ethan? Please." I thought about the years of silence, the broken promises, the missed milestones. I thought about the pain and the anger, the way I had built walls around my heart to protect myself from more hurt. Could I forgive him? Could I let go of the past and start over? As I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward, to heal, to rebuild. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. "I forgive you, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "But it's going to take time. We have a lot to work through." He nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. "I understand. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." The turning point had come. The silence that had defined our relationship for so long was finally broken, replaced by the hope of a new beginning. But as I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, we could build a future together. The days following my dad's heart attack were a blur of hospital visits, doctor's appointments, and difficult conversations. Maya came with me to the hospital, her presence a comfort as we navigated the maze of medical jargon and emotional turmoil. Patricia was there too, her guilt evident in the way she hovered, offering to help but never quite knowing how. One afternoon, as my dad rested, Patricia pulled me aside. "Ethan, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tight. I followed her to the hospital cafeteria, the smell of coffee and disinfectant filling the air. We sat at a table, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. "I know you hate me," she said, her eyes fixed on the table. "And I don't blame you. I've done things I'm not proud of. I waited, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, to tell her how she had destroyed my family, how she had turned my dad against me. But another part of me knew that anger wouldn't solve anything. I didn't mean to come between you and your dad, she continued, her voice breaking. I was lonely, Ethan. After my first husband died, I was alone. Your dad. He was kind, he listened. I thought I could have a second chance at happiness. I studied her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. For the first time, she looked human, not like the villain I had made her out to be. But you push him away from me, I said, my voice flat. You made him choose between us. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I was selfish. I wanted his attention, his love. I didn't think about how it would affect you. I'm so sorry, Ethan. Truly sorry. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. I wanted to believe her, to see the person behind the facade, but the hurt was too deep, too real. How could I forgive someone who had caused so much pain? I need you to leave him alone, I said, my voice steady. Let him recover. Let him decide what he wants. She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. What do you mean? I said, standing up, that my dad needs to make his own choices. Without you influencing him. Without the pressure. He needs to decide if he wants to rebuild our relationship. And he can't do that with you in the picture. She stared at me, her face pale. You want me to leave him? I want you to give him space, I corrected. Let him heal. Let him think. Let him decide. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. Okay, I'll do that. For him. I left the cafeteria, my heart pounding. The confrontation had been harder than I expected, the weight of my words hanging in the air. But as I walked back to my dad's room, I knew I had done the right thing. He needed to heal, to find his own way back to me, without Patricia's influence. When I entered the room, my dad was awake, his eyes bright with fever. Ethan, he said, his voice weak. Patricia told me what you said, about giving me space. I sat by the bed, taking his hand. I'm in it, Dad. You need to recover. You need to decide what you want. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. I've been thinking a lot, he said, his voice trembling. About the past. About the choices I made. I was wrong, Ethan. So wrong. I waited, my heart pounding, as he spoke. He told me about the guilt he felt, about the ways he had failed me, about the regret that had haunted him for years. He spoke of Patricia, of how she had become controlling, of how he had let her come between us. I should have been stronger, he said, his voice breaking. I should have put you first. I nodded, the tears streaming down my face. You should have. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Can you forgive me, Ethan? Please. I thought about the years of silence, the broken promises, the missed milestones. I thought about the pain and the anger, the way I had built walls around my heart to protect myself from more hurt. Could I forgive him? Could I let go of the past and start over? As I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing to move forward, to heal, to rebuild. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I forgive you, Dad, I said, my voice steady. But it's going to take time. We have a lot to work through. He nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. I understand. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. The confrontation had been hard, but it had been necessary. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, we could build a future together. As I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. The weeks following my dad's heart attack were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Maya and I moved into a small apartment near the hospital, taking turns staying with my dad as he recovered. Patricia visited occasionally, her guilt evident in the way she hovered, but she kept her distance, respecting my request for space. My dad's recovery was slow but steady. The doctors were optimistic, but they warned that he would need to make significant lifestyle changes. No more late nights, no more stress, no more Patricia. As my dad grew stronger, the conversations between us grew deeper. We talked about the past, about the mistakes we had made, about the pain we had caused each other. I listened as he spoke of his guilt, of the ways he had failed me, of the regret that had haunted him for years. And I spoke of my own pain, of the silence that had defined our relationship, of the anger and hurt that had built walls between us. One evening, as we sat in the hospital room, my dad looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, I want to make this right. I want to rebuild our relationship. But I need your help." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I'm here, Dad. Whatever you need." He took a deep breath, then spoke the words I had been waiting to hear. "I want to leave Patricia. I can't live like this anymore. I can't let her control me. I can't let her come between us." I stared at him, surprised. "Are you sure?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm sure. I love her, Ethan, but I love you more, and I can't lose you again." The words hung in the air, raw and honest. I wanted to believe him, to see the man behind the facade, but the doubt was too strong, the hurt too deep. How could I trust him after all this time? "I need time," I said, my voice steady. "To think, to process." He nodded, understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need." As the days passed, my dad made good on his promise. He distanced himself from Patricia, focusing on his recovery and on rebuilding our relationship. He called me regularly, asking about my day, sharing stories from his childhood, and expressing his regret for the past. Maya and I visited him often, bringing homemade meals and laughter. We talked about everything and nothing, the past fading into the background as we focused on the present. My dad seemed happier, more at peace, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. One afternoon, as we sat in the hospital room, my dad looked at me, his eyes filled with hope. "Ethan, I want to ask you something. When I get out of here, I want to take you fishing. Just the two of us. Like old times." I smiled, the memory of our fishing trips flooding back. "I like that, Dad. I'd really like that." He nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." The aftermath of the confrontation had been hard, but it had been worth it. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, we could build a future together. As I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. By the time my dad was released from the hospital, 6 weeks had passed. The doctors had given him a clean bill of health, but they had warned him to take it easy, to avoid stress, and to focus on his health. Patricia had visited once, bringing a basket of fruit and a card, but my dad had sent her away, his voice firm but kind. "I need space, Patricia," he had said. "I need to focus on my health and on my son." Patricia had nodded, her eyes filled with tears, and left. Since then, she had called occasionally, but my dad had ignored the calls, focusing instead on rebuilding our relationship. The first fishing trip was a milestone. We drove to the lake where we had spent so many summers, the familiar scent of pine and water filling the air. As we sat on the dock, fishing rods in hand, my dad looked at me, his eyes filled with hope. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I know, Dad. I forgive you." He smiled, a genuine smile that I hadn't seen in years. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." We fished in silence for a while, the only sounds the lapping of water and the occasional bird call. As the sun began to set, my dad spoke again. "Ethan, I want to ask you something. When I get my strength back, I want to take you on a road trip. Just the two of us. We can visit the places we used to go, the places your mom loved." I smiled, the memory of my mom flooding back. "I like that, Dad. I really like that." He nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." The new beginning had started, slowly and carefully, but it had started. The past couldn't be erased, but maybe, just maybe, we could build a future together. As I sat there, holding my dad's hand, I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. The silence that had defined our relationship for so long was finally broken, replaced by the hope of a new beginning. And as I sat there holding my dad's hand, I knew that the silence had changed everything.